Conditions worsen for asylum seekers. Will Tijuana be able to handle the swelling crowds? And will new leadership in Mexico change the situation? The legal fight over the 2007 firestorm drags on. SDG&E's request to pass costs to ratepayers was denied, but the utility says it didn't get a fair hearing. And senior homeowners are being targeted. High-pressure tactics lead to quick sales and predatory loans. How this is a side effect of the inflated housing market. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. Joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, Rob Nikolewski, who covers energy for the San Diego Union Tribune, Fronteras reporter Jean Guerrero of KPBS News, David Wellna, national security correspondent for NPR, and KPBS investigative reporter Amitha Sharma. With the issues surrounding thousands from Central America seeking asylum at our border seem endlessly complex, objective facts and legitimate questions often get drowned out by political noise. Refugees rush to border barriers. U.S. agents fire tear gas into Mexico. Amid the chaos, President Trump falsely claims 3 agents were, quote, very badly hurt by rocks and stones. Meanwhile, the misery index rises among refugees encamped in Tijuana. And Jean, start there. We had heavy rain on Thursday, and Mexican officials are trying to help refugees, and they're moving them.
Exactly, yeah. The main shelter where they were staying got completely inundated with the rains, people's blankets just floating in water. So they're transferring people over to another facility, an abandoned concert hall, essentially. It's got some indoor areas, some outdoor areas as well. And last night they transported about 750 people, and they're transporting people throughout the day. It's a slow process because they're taking them in buses, which fit about 40 people each, and there's more than 6,000 people that they need to transport. But the idea is to take everybody over there so they can keep them all in one spot and provide them with the services that they need. But some people don't want to go because they're nervous, like, where are you taking us? A lot of the people I've been speaking to just have sort of this lack of information. They don't know what to believe, and so some people just don't want to leave, but the idea is that they have to all go to this new facility. Yeah,
and that new facility, that'll house what, about 7,000? So
exactly.
It should take
so
care
it has
of the
a
crowd
capacity for 7,500,
Okay.
which should house most
of the folks who are there now. And we had this Sunday border rush, got national news here. David's here covering that, and their hopes of getting asylum in the U.S. You had an interesting story about rumors going through the community down there among the refugees, and it's just kind of rather chaotic yet.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like people didn't know what to expect when they got to the border. A lot of people thought it was going to be way easier to get into the United States, and they're very surprised by the backlogs and the border security. And then you see some people deciding, okay, well, I'm just going to apply for asylum in Mexico, hundreds of people doing that, hundreds of others who are deciding to go back to Central America, in part because of some very sort of scary rumors that have been spreading ever since the clash. I was at the camp one day when everybody was talking about a child that had allegedly died during the border clash with the tear gas, which is something that didn't happen. But everybody was convinced that the child had died, that the U.S. government was being violent towards them, and that they had to go home because they had wanted to protect their children. So a lot of fear driving them to go back home.
Are there any officials who are attempting to clarify these rumors?
I do know that there are some nonprofits that have been making informal efforts, like whenever they get asked to try to clarify, like, no, that didn't happen. But it's been hard to send coordinated messages because the group is so disorganized, and I haven't seen any real effort to get them more coordinated, although I spoke to one activist at Pueblos Sin Fronteras who says that the migrants are trying to elect representatives to get more organization so that people actually know what's going on and what the process is. Like yesterday, a lot of mothers were saying, I heard that we have to go put our names down in a notebook to get our turn to ask for asylum. But I don't know if that's true, and I don't want to go because who knows what's going to happen to me over there. There's just a lot of confusion.
And David, you're here covering this for NPR and for a national audience. And what's your impressions about the fallout from what happened Sunday, and what's your national audience hearing and seeing in what's going on at the border?
Well, I should make it clear that I was not here on Sunday. I got here on Monday evening, but when I went to the shelter on Tuesday, you could really sense that there was a lot of sense of shock almost about what had happened on Sunday. I think people didn't really expect that the U.S. officials would be firing across the border with tear gas canisters. One of the first persons I talked to was a young man from Honduras who had just agreed to be sent home. He was not being sent home because he'd been arrested, but rather because he'd been talked into this is a better option for you than trying to get across the U.S. border, which to many of the people there, it seemed maybe an impossible dream, or at least one that they couldn't realize at the moment. Just a lot of rethinking, it seemed, was going on, recalculating about how long they might be there and what their other options might be, especially looking for work here.
And are we seeing some folks now head back to back home?
There are several hundred that I know of who have been sent back, some against their will, most of them having agreed to go back. But a lot of people who are there, who I talked to, just said, I want to, I came all this way and I want to make this be worth the effort. They were willing to bide their time in Tijuana, even take a job. There's a jobs fair where 2,000 of the people at this shelter have signed up. That's nearly half of the adults there. And see what happens. The Mexican government is offering them 1-year humanitarian visas that can be renewed also. And there's also kind of a sense that maybe there was a deal made with the U.S. to keep them here and give them jobs. People were talking about that. Nobody really had much evidence that a deal was made.
But if some of these migrants, the ones who decide to stay in Mexico and take advantage of what the Mexican government is offering them, what does that do to their chances in getting asylum in the U.S.?
Well, I'm not sure what the effect would be in terms of the eyes of the U.S. They might say, look, you're already established in Mexico. If you're afraid of being persecuted in your home country, what need do you have to cross into the U.S. if you're already established in Mexico? They say, well, look, we have no guarantees that we can stay on in Mexico. The authorities here might change their minds and say, we're not going to renew your visa, and then what do we do? There's that argument.
And some people don't feel safe in Mexico because a lot of the gangs that they're fleeing, MS-13 and 18th Street, they have networks through Mexico, and and then they're also aware of the fact that Tijuana is seeing record violence. Homicides are at an all-time high, and I've had mothers tell me they don't feel safe on the streets. They just want to go into the United States. That was their plan, and they're gonna wait as long as it takes for that opportunity.
Rob, I wanted to talk for a moment about economic impact, because in that scene on Sunday, the border was shut for a time. You had a story this week of the short-term impact on that. President Trump has threatened to shut the border for some indeterminate amount of time. What impact would that have on this region?
Yes, my colleague Lori Weisberg and I wrote a story about that in the Union Tribune this week. It's a pretty massive amount of money. The San Isidro crossing is the busiest crossing in the Western Hemisphere. 70,000 vehicles, 25,000 pedestrians come across every day. Estimated commercial economic impact in between San Diego and Tijuana is $2.1 million per day. And you mentioned about how the border was shut down for about 5 hours. And because of that, a number of the outlet stores and the other shopkeepers in San Isidro had to shut down. During that 5-hour period, it's been estimated they lost about $5 million worth of sales.
Yeah, so it's a huge
lot.
deal. We had the governor-elect Gavin Newsom at Otay Mesa on Thursday. We got a bite from him on talking about this economic impact.
Saw what happened here on Sunday. You all reported it. Estimated $5.3 million of economic loss just for a few hours of shutting down the border. I mean, you're talking about millions and millions of dollars, billions of dollars of economic consequence if we continue with this rhetoric around shutting down the border without considering what that means.
All right, and David, Newsom also talked about that quite a different approach from the Trump administration. He says we shouldn't politicize this issue. We've got to humanize this issue. It's a humanitarian challenge for us. How does that square with what the federal government's saying?
Well, Trump today said that he was sure that public opinion was squarely behind him in putting up a strong security presence along the border, discouraging anyone from even trying to cross. And I think that Trump thinks this is a winning issue for him. There is no indication that the U.S. is backing down on this. There are demands that the U.S. Facilitate petitions for asylum in the U.S. Because there's a big backlog right now, and they've been taking fewer than 100 petitions a day, and it's not clear whether that's going to change or if that's going to be also a factor in discouraging people from even applying. I asked people at the shelter if they had applied for asylum in the U.S., and several people told me, look, I put my name on a list, and then they've got my name, and they can accuse me of being in Mexico illegally and deport me. There's just a very low level of trust, everything having to do with the U.S.
Well, we're going to be covering this extensively going forward here, out of time on this segment today, but it's a remarkable story. We're going to move on now. The last truly major wildfire in San Diego County killed 2 people, destroyed more than 1,300 homes, and caused over 10,000 people to evacuate. And San Diego Gas and Electric was ruled as the chief culprit behind those 2007 fires, Rob. Now, decision that never set well with the utilities. Start with the rulings against SDG&E. Who made them, and what was the result?
Well, last November, the California Public Utilities Commission voted 5-0 against SDG&E's request to pass on the remaining $379 million of outstanding costs from those 2007 wildfires. The Commission's decision was based on what they called a prudent management standard, and they said that that SDG&E did not, quote, reasonably manage or operate its facilities. Now, SDG&E's argument has been since 2007 was that they feel they did prudently manage their transmission and distribution lines, and they also say that there was unprecedented amounts of Santa Ana winds that led to that, and so that's the root of the problem, or the root of the dispute.
So this week, what was the news this week? What action did SDG&E take this week with this battle? It's 11 years since the fires.
They're not giving up without a fight, and they're now taking the fight to the California State Supreme Court. They want the State Supreme Court to rehear the case. Like I said, they originally the CPUC said sorry. They went back to the CPUC and said, we want you to rehear this. And the CPUC said sorry. Then they went to an appeals court. They said, we want the appeals court to get involved, and the appeals court said, sorry. So now they're going to the Supreme Court.
And go ahead, Amitha.
On what grounds are they going to the Supreme Court? What's different about this request?
Well, it's basically, there isn't much difference at all. They're making the same argument they were doing, that they were making. Just
going up the judicial ladder.
Exactly.
There's a wrinkle in this particular filing, because they went after one of the judges personally. Tell us about that.
Patricia Benke, who's on the appeals court in San Diego. They're saying that the judge who wrote the decision in the appeals court, telling them, no, we're not going to hear your case, they're saying that she should have recused herself because she owned a house that was burned down in the fire, and she and her husband sued SDG&E as well as the parent company Sempra and also Cox Communications as well in this suit. According to the justices, I wanted to talk to the justice, but the justice can't talk about a pending case. But according to the justice's brother, yes, the justice and her brother owned a house, but the house was owned originally by their father, who had a home in Rancho Bernardo that burned down in 2007. He passed away. The house was then given to the brother and to the justice as part of a family trust. And the justice never lived there, but she did take a part.
And she wasn't the sole ruler on.
Right, exactly.
She wasn't the only judge.
Right. She wrote the opinion, but it was a 3 appellate judge decision, and all 3 appellate judges said, sorry to SDG&E, we're not going to take your case.
All right. Now, how much would it cost ratepayers if they're ultimately have to cover utilities losses. And I should say these are the remaining losses. The
right.
utilities already paid a ton of money,
right.
much more than this, to settle lawsuits.
Right. They estimate that it would be $1.76 for an average SDG&E ratepayer spread out over 6 years.
Yeah, that'd be monthly fee over
yes.
6 years. Okay.
Yes.
So not that much money involved. And they paid over $2 billion already.
They paid $2 billion. They also had a $1.1 billion in insurance. So one question I commonly get covering this story is, why didn't they have more insurance? SDG&E says that in 2007 they had $1.1 billion in insurance, which is as much as they could get.
Okay. Now, but there's more at stake here, right? Without getting too deep into the weeds, give us the principle behind all this. And the other utilities in California are looking at this because even much greater losses, of course, in the Camp Fire we've seen in Northern California, fire, the Woolsey Fire near Malibu.
There's lawsuits piling up there against possibly PG&E.
And more fires to come, undoubtedly.
Exactly. The root of the dispute is something called inverse condemnation. And in California, the way inverse condemnation has been interpreted is that if the utility's equipment has sparked a fire, caused a fire that led to property damage,
which was the case here.
Yes, that the utility is on the hook for the damages, even if their equipment had followed all the procedures, even if the utility had followed all the procedures. And so the utilities are arguing, well, as long as we've managed our equipment correctly and under the correct amount of procedures, then that's unfair.
Okay. And that's what they want to ultimately see the state Supreme Court.
They want to see some clarity. Basically, I mean, you can talk about inverse condemnation, and as you mentioned, it's very complex, but they want to be able to recover through rates the damages. They want to be able to pass those damages on, provided that their equipment did not spark the fire, and that, or I should say, that their equipment did not negligently.
In other words, they had followed all the rules and procedures.
But Rob, is this the case to wage that fight on, given that its equipment did spark the fires, and there were investigators who went in and said that this company did not properly maintain
Yes, that's
its
true.
equipment?
However, SDG&E comes back and argues that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission came back and awarded SDG&E some money, saying that they did act as prudently. So there's some loggerheads there.
And as we say, these other utilities are watching statewide
very, very closely.
Because I mean, we've had stories in the Los Angeles Times. The Camp Fire alone might bankrupt Pacific Gas and Electric.
Exactly, and Pacific Gas and Electric's under a lot because there were fires last year, as we recall, the Thomas Fire down in Southern California.
Which at that time were the worst fires and now been surpassed.
And then there were the Wine Country fires. Right. And so, so the utilities are watching this very, very closely.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating decision. What's the likely timeline on this? Do we know?
So the Supreme Court doesn't really have a specific timeline, but most of the people I've talked to have said that they expect a decision from the Supreme Court within a matter of weeks, which is fairly expeditious.
Okay, we'll look on to that. We're going to move ahead now. Well, longtime homeowners in San Diego and much of California are sitting on big piles of equity. That represents fat veins of cash to unscrupulous lenders. They view some elderly homeowners as easy marks and come calling with deals that appear too good to refuse. So, Mitha, start by explaining PACE, P-A-C-E. What's that all about? And that's at the heart of this story.
So PACE it stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy, and these are loans that can only be used for upgrading for energy efficiency projects in your home. And
what would be a couple examples of that?
So like if you want to get solar panels, you want to get windows that were more energy efficient. So what's happened is, I mean, the way the loans are structured is that you pay off the loans through your property tax bill. So, and once you take out a PACE loan, then a lien automatically goes on to your property. And that lien takes priority over any other lien. So
that's first position then.
So if a borrower defaults, then it's the PACE lender that gets paid back before the mortgage lender. And it's local governments that collect the repayment. So again, if a person defaults, it's local governments who come in and seize the home to ensure that the PACE lender gets paid back.
In your story, you focused on a homeowner to kind of tell this story and what happens in a specific case. Robert Unser, tell us about his circumstance.
So Robert Unser is 74 years old. He lives in San Diego. He's a homeowner. He has cognitive disabilities, and I say that only because he has 4 PACE loans, has 4 liens on his property, and because you pay off the loans through your property tax bill, his property tax bill has gone from just over $300 a year to $17,000 a year. Meanwhile,
so he'd been in his home a long time,
right,
and the taxes were still
right,
low for that.
Right. So meanwhile, he brings in $11,000 a year in Social Security income.
No way to pay that property tax bill.
Very difficult. And he's in danger of losing his home as a result.
And how does someone like him wind up with 4 PACE loans? I mean, it just seems unreasonable to the average person.
Well, I asked him that question because of his cognitive issues. He doesn't know. He does not know how he ended up with 4 loans. But these loans are offered door to door. So his lawyer, Katie Box, who's with the San Diego Legal Aid Society, says that, look, he's lonely. He lives alone. He has no family. So everybody who comes knocking at his door, he lets in. And so she says, she can well imagine that these solicitors came to the door. They get inside, they look around, and they say, look, your kitchen could be remodeled, or look at these windows, they could be replaced, or you need new solar panels. And so he signed on the dotted line. And she points out the absurdity of all this because she says, look, he never uses his kitchen. He gets Meals on Wheels, so he never cooks. In terms of the solar panels that he got, he lives in a very confined space in his living room. He sleeps. It would never
pencil out if you looked at solar.
He sleeps there, he eats there, he watches TV there. So he's not using a lot of power.
Right. So he's seen as a mark. Now, what are the lenders who are involved in this this PACE operation? What do they have to say about the fact that there's attorneys filing civil suits and criticizing money?
Well, so Renovate America and Renew Financial are 2 of the largest PACE loan providers in California. And so they won't comment on Unser's suit specifically, although Renovate America says that his lawsuit is meritless. What Renovate America has said that we've lobbied hard to toughen income verification rules. In other words, we also want to ensure that people have the ability to pay back these loans. However, after our story ran, a state lawmaker disputed that in terms of Renovate America. There's a little bit of back and forth between the 2, which you can read more about on our website, kpbs.org. Renew Financial says, look, these complaints against these PACE loans represent a very tiny fraction of the business that we do with thousands of homeowners. I should say, as you mentioned, there are lawsuits against these lenders, including 2 lawsuits in LA County that are seeking class action status. And those homeowners are saying, look, we did not understand the terms of these loans. We do not have the ability to pay them back. We are facing foreclosure. And as far as those energy upgrades go, they're not really saving us very much money. So that's where that lies.
So the lawsuits are trying to police this then in some way, because the lenders apparently aren't doing it in terms of the people who are going door to door. How do they target people like Robert Unser to begin with?
That's unclear. I mean, I know that in general, people are looking at property records, right? And they're saying, well, okay, this person has owned this property for a long time. So they probably have a lot of equity in their home.
And they figure to be elderly.
Maybe. But, rules did take effect this year that are toughening the laws. It's making it's requiring these lenders to really assess a person's ability to pay. But you have thousands of homeowners who took out these loans before those rules took effect. And I have to add one point about Robert Unser in terms of how he got the loans. He agreed to those loans by signing off on electronic document signing. But this is a man who doesn't have an internet connection, he doesn't own a computer, and he doesn't have a cell phone.
Not savvy in that world at all.
So he has next to nothing in terms of documentation. So that is, and yet he's in danger of losing his home.
Well, you wonder about the lender's relationship with the folks who engaged him at the door. And what about on the criminal side? Well, you've talked about lawsuits and civil suits being filed, and there may be some accounting there. But what about, I know the DA's office in San Diego County has an elder abuse unit that's very active and all. What about criminal?
So I spoke with the DA's office, and the prosecutors there, as well as in the State Attorney General's office and probably across DA's offices in California, are are aware of the problems with PACE lending, but in terms of attempts at accountability, because of the way the rules were written up until April of this year, in terms of accountability, that's mostly being done, attempts at accountability, I should say, through these civil lawsuits.
Okay, so that's where we're at now. And you did touch on, you might see some legislative relief here, some lawmakers maybe stepping in and taking a look at this whole operation.
Well, those rules took effect, so they did look at it for a few years now, and those rules took effect in April of this year. Whether there's going to be additional legislation, it's possible.
Okay, it'll just depend on how many complaints they get, the results of these civil suits, and what happens to these folks going forward.
Yes.
Very interesting tale here. Well, we are about out of time, so we'll look for a follow-up and see what happens on that score as well. That wraps up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable, and I'd like to thank my guests, Rob Nicoleski of the San Diego Union Tribune, Jean Guerrero of KPBS News, David Welna of NPR, and Amitha Sharma, also of KPBS. And a reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer, and thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.